Carlos Castaneda's The Art of Dreaming, Chapter 4, The Fixation of the Assemblage Point. Since our agreement had been to discuss dreaming only when Don Juan considered it necessary, I rarely asked him about it and never insisted on continuing my questions beyond a certain point. I was more than eager, therefore, to listen to him whenever he decided to take up the subject. His comments or discussions on dreaming were invariably cushioned in other topics of his teachings, and they were always suddenly and abruptly brought in. We were engaged in some unrelated conversation once while I was visiting him in his house, when without any preamble he said that by means of their dreaming contacts with inorganic beings, the old sorcerers became immensely well-versed in the manipulation of the assemblage point, a vast and ominous subject. I immediately grabbed the opportunity and asked Don Juan for an estimate of the time when the old sorcerers might have lived. At various opportunities before, I had asked him the same question, but he never gave me a satisfactory answer. I was confident, however, that at the moment, perhaps because he had brought up the subject himself, he might be willing to oblige me. A most trying subject, he said. The way he said it made me believe he was discarding my question. I was quite surprised when he continued talking. I'll tax your rationality as much as the topic of inorganic beings. By the way, what do you think about them now? I have let my opinions rest, I said. I can't afford to think one way or the other. My answer delighted him. He laughed and commented on his own fears of and aversions to the inorganic beings. They have never been my cup of tea, he said. Of course, the main reason was my fear of them. I was unable to get over it when I had to, and then it became fixed. Do you fear them now, Don Juan? It's not quite fear, I feel, but revulsion. I don't want any part of them. Is there any particular reason for this revulsion? The best reason in the world. We are anti-ethical. They love slavery. I love freedom. They love to buy, and I don't sell. I became inexplicably agitated and brusquely told him that the subject was so far-fetched for me that I could not take it seriously. He stared at me smiling and said, "The best thing to do with inorganic beings is what you do. Deny their existence, but visit them regularly and maintain that you are dreaming, and in dreaming anything is possible. This way you don't commit yourself." I felt strangely guilty, although I could not figure out why. I felt compelled to ask, "What are you referring to, Don Juan?" "To your visits with the inorganic beings," he replied dryly. "Are you kidding? What visits?" I didn't want to discuss this, but I think it's time I tell you that the nagging voice you heard, reminding you to fix your dreaming attention on the items of your dreams, was the voice of an inorganic being. I thought Don Juan was completely irrational. I became so irritated that I even yelled at him. He laughed at me and asked me to tell him about my irregular dreaming sessions. That request surprised me. I had never mentioned to anyone that every so often I used to zoom out of a dream pulled by a given item. But instead of my changing dreams, as I should have, the total mood of the dream changed, and I would find myself in a dimension unknown to me. I soared in it, directed by some invisible guide, which made me twirl around and around. I always awoke from one of these dreams still twirling, and I continued tossing and turning for a long time before I fully woke up. "Those are bona fide meetings you are having with your inorganic being friends," Don Juan said. I did not want to argue with him, but neither did I want to agree. I remained silent. I had forgotten my question about the old sorcerers, but Don Juan picked up the subject again. "My understanding is that the old sorcerers existed, perhaps as far back as 10,000 years ago," he said, smiling and watching for my reaction. Basing my response on current archaeological data on the migration of Asiatic nomadic tribes to the Americas, I said that I believed his date was incorrect. 10,000 years was too far back. "You have your knowledge and I have mine," he said. "My knowledge is that the old sorcerers ruled for 4,000 years, from 7,000 to 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, they went to nothing. And from then on, sorcerers have been regrouping, restructuring what was left of the old ones. How can you be so sure about your dates, I asked. How can you be so sure about yours, he retorted. I told him that archaeologists have foolproof methods to establish the date of past cultures. Again, he retorted that sorcerers have foolproof methods of their own. I'm not trying to be contrary or argue you down, he continued, but someday soon you may be able to ask someone who knows for sure. No one can know this for sure, Don Juan. There is another of those impossible things to believe. This is another of those impossible things to believe. But there is somebody who can verify all this. You'll meet that person someday. Come on, Don Juan. You've got to be joking. Who can verify what happened 7,000 years ago? Very simple. One of the old sorcerers we've been talking about. The one I met. He's the one who told me all about the old sorcerers. I hope you remember what I am telling you and about that particular man. He is the key to many of our endeavors, and he is also the one you have to meet. I told Don Juan that I was hanging on his every word he said, even though I did not understand what he was saying. He accused me of humoring him and not believing a word about the old sorcerers. I admitted that in my state of daily consciousness, of course, I had not believed those far-fetched stories. But neither had I in the second attention, although there I should have had a different reaction. Only when you ponder what I said does it become far-fetched story, he remarked. If you don't involve your common sense, it remains purely a matter of energy. What did you say, Don Juan? That I'm going to meet one of the old sorcerers? Because you are. It is vital that the two of you meet someday. But for the moment, just let me tell you another far-fetched story about one of the narwhals of my line, the narwhal Sebastian. Don Juan told me then that the narwhal Sebastian had been a sexton in a church in southern Mexico around the beginning of the 18th century. In his account, Don Juan stressed how sorcerers, past or present, seek and find refuge in established institutions, such as the church. It was his idea that because of their superior discipline, sorcerers are Sorcerers are trustworthy employees, and that they are avidly sought by institutions that are always in dire need of such persons. Don Juan maintained that as long as no one is aware of the sorcerers' doings, their lack of ideological sympathies makes them appear as model workers. Don Juan continued his story and said that one day, while Sebastian was performing his duties as sexton, a strange man came into the church, an old Indian who seemed to be ill. In a weak voice, he told Sebastian that he needed help. The narwhal thought that the Indian wanted the parish priest, but the man, making a great effort, addressed the narwhal. In a harsh and direct tone, he told him that he knew that Sebastian was not only a sorcerer, but a narwhal. Sebastian, quite alarmed by the sudden turn of events, pulled the Indian aside and demanded an apology. The man replied that he was not there to apologize, but to get specialized help. He needed, he said, to receive the narwhal's energy in order to maintain his life, which, he assured Sebastian, had spanned thousands of years, but at the moment was ebbing away. Sebastian, who was a very intelligent man, unwilling to pay attention to such nonsense, urged the Indian to stop clowning around. The old man became angry and threatened Sebastian with exposing him and his group to the ecclesiastical authorities if he did not comply with his request. Don Juan reminded me that those were the times when the ecclesiastical authorities were brutally and systematically eradicating heretical practices among the Indians of the New World. The man's threat was not something to be taken lightly. The narwhal and his group were indeed in mortal danger. Sebastian asked the Indian how he could give him energy. The man explained that narwhals, by means of their discipline, gain a peculiar energy that they store in their bodies, and that he would get it painlessly from Sebastian's energy center on his navel. In return for it, Sebastian would get not only the opportunity to continue his activities unscathed, but also a gift of power. The knowledge that he was being manipulated by the old man did not sit right with the Nawal, but the man was inflexible and left him no alternative but to comply with his request. Don Juan assured me that the old Indian was not exaggerating about his claims at all. He turned out to be one of the sorcerers of ancient times, one of those known as the Death Defiers. He had apparently survived to the present by manipulating his assemblage point in ways that only he knew about. Don Juan said that what transpired between Sebastian and that man later became the ground for an agreement that had bound all 6 Nawals who followed Sebastian. The Death Defier kept his word. In exchange for energy from every one of those men, he made a donation to the giver, a gift of power. Sebastian had accepted such a gift, although reluctantly. He had been cornered and had no other choice. All the other Nawals who followed him, however, gladly and proudly accepted their gifts. Don Juan concluded his story saying that over time the Death Defier came to be known as the Tenant, and for over 200 years the Nawals of Don Juan's line honored that binding agreement, creating a symbiotic relationship that changed the course and final goal of their lineage. Don Juan did not care to explain the story any further, and I was left with a strange sensation of truthfulness, which was more bothersome to me than I could have imagined. "How did he get to live that long?" I asked. "No one knows," Don Juan replied. "All we've known about him for generations is what he tells us. The Death Defier is the one I asked about the Old Sorcerers, and he told me that they were at their peak 3,000 years ago." "How do you know he was telling you the truth?" I asked. Don Juan shook his head in amazement, if not revulsion. "When you're facing that inconceivable unknown out there," he said, pointing all around him, "you don't fool around with petty lies. Petty lies are only for people who have never witnessed what's out there waiting for them." "What's waiting for us out there, Don Juan?" His answer, a seemingly innocuous phrase, was more terrifying to me than if he had described the most horrendous thing. "Something utterly impersonal," he said. He must have noticed that I was coming apart. He made me change levels of awareness to make my fright vanish. A few months later, my dreaming practices took a strange turn. I began to get in my dreams replies to questions I was planning to ask Don Juan. The most impressive part of this oddity was that it quickly lapsed into my waking hours. One day, while I was sitting at my desk, I got a reply to an unvoiced question about the realness of inorganic beings. I had seen inorganic beings in dreams so many times I had begun to think of them as real. I reminded myself I had even touched one in a state of semi-normal consciousness in the Sonoran Desert. And my dreams had been periodically deviated to views of worlds I seriously doubted could have been products of my mentality. I wished to give Don Juan my best shot in terms of concise query, so I molded a question in my mind. If one is to accept that inorganic beings are as real as people, where in the physicality of the universe is the realm in which they exist? After formulating the question to myself, I heard a strange laughter, just as I had the day I wrestled with the inorganic being. Then a man's voice answered me. "That realm exists in a particular position of the assemblage point," it said, "just like your world exists in a habitual position of the assemblage point." The last thing I wanted was to enter into a dialogue with a disembodied voice, so I stood up and ran out of my house. The thought occurred to me that I was losing my mind, another worry to add to my collection of worries. The voice had been so clear and authoritative that it not only intrigued me, but terrified me. I waited with great trepidation for oncoming barrages of that voice, but the event was never repeated. At the first opportunity I had, I consulted with Don Juan. He was not impressed in the least. You must understand once and for all that things like this are very normal in the life of a sorcerer, he said. You are not going mad, you are simply hearing the voice of the dreaming emissary. Upon crossing the first or second gate of dreaming, dreamers reach a threshold of energy and begin to see things or to hear things. Not really plural voices, but a singular voice. Sorcerers call it the voice of the dreaming emissary. What is the dreaming emissary? Alien energy that has consciousness. Alien energy that purports to aid dreamers by telling them things. The problem with the dreaming emissary is that it can tell only what the sorcerers already know or should know, were they worth their salt. To say that it's alien energy that has conciseness doesn't help at all, Don Juan. What kind of energy? Benign, malignant, right, wrong, what? It's just what I said. Alien energy, an impersonal force that we turn into a very personal one because it has a voice. Some sorcerers swear by it, or even see it, or as you yourself have done, they simply hear it as a man's or a woman's voice. And the voice can tell them about the state of things, which most of them they take as sacred advice. Why do some of us hear it as a voice? We see it or hear it because we maintain our assemblage point fixed on a specific new position. The more intense this fixation, the more intense our experience of the emissary. Watch out, you may see it and feel it as a naked woman. Haha. Don Juan laughed at his own remark, but I was too scared for levity. Is this force capable of materializing itself, I asked. Certainly, he replied, and it all depends on how fixed the assemblage point is. But rest assured, if you are capable of maintaining a degree of detachment, nothing happens. The emissary remains what it is, an impersonal voice that acts on us because of the fixation of our assemblage points. Is its advice safe and sound? It cannot be advice. It only tells us what's what, and then we draw the inferences ourselves. I told Don Juan then about what the voice had said to me. It's just like I said, Don Juan remarked. The emissary didn't tell you anything new. Its statements were correct, but it only seemed to be revealing things to you. What the emissary did was merely repeat what you already knew. I'm afraid I can't claim that I knew all that, Don Juan. Oh, yes, you can. You know infinitely more about the mysteries of the universe than you rationally suspect. But that's our human malady, to know more about the mystery of the universe than we suspect. Having experienced this incredible phenomenon all by myself, without Don Juan's coaching, made me feel elated. I wanted more information about the emissary. I began to ask Don Juan whether he also heard the emissary's voice. He interrupted me and with a broad smile said, Yes, the emissary also talks to me. In my youth I used to see it as a friar with a black cowl. A talking friar who used to scare the daylights out of me every time. Then, when my fear was more manageable, it became a disembodied voice, which tells me things to this very day. What kind of things, Don Juan? Anything I focus my intent on. Things I don't want to take the trouble of following up myself. Like, for example, details about the behavior of my apprentices. What they do when I'm not around. It tells me things about you in particular. The emissary tells me everything you do. At that point, I really did not care for the direction of our conversation had taken. I frantically searched my mind for questions about other topics while he roared with laughter. Is the dreaming emissary an inorganic being, I asked. Let's say that the dreaming emissary is a force that comes from the realm of inorganic beings. This is the reason dreamers always encounter it. Do you mean, Don Juan, that every dreamer hears or sees the emissary? Everyone hears the emissary. Very few see it or feel it. Do you have any explanation for this? No, besides I really don't care about the emissary. At one point in my life, I had to make a decision, whether to concentrate on the inorganic beings and follow in the footsteps of the old sorcerers, or to refuse all that. My teacher, the Narwhal Julian, helped me make up my mind to refuse it. I never regretted that decision. Do you think I should refuse the inorganic beings myself, Don Juan? He did not answer me. Instead, he explained that the whole realm of inorganic beings is always poised to teach. Perhaps because inorganic beings have a deeper consciousness than ours, they feel compelled to take us under their wings. I don't see any point in becoming their pupil, he added. Their price is too high. What is their price? Our lives, our energy, our devotion to them. In other words, our freedom. But what do they teach? Things pertinent to their world, the same way we ourselves would teach them, if we were capable of teaching them things pertinent to our world. Their method, however, is to take your basic self as a gauge of what we need and then teach us accordingly. A most dangerous affair. I don't see why it would be dangerous. If someone was going to take your basic self as a gauge, with all your fears and greed and envy, etc., etc., and teach you what fulfills that horrible state of being, what do you think the result would be? I had no comeback. I thought I understood perfectly well the reasons for his rejection. The problem with the old sorcerers was that they learned wonderful things, but on the basis of their unadulterated lower selves, Don Juan went on. The inorganic beings became their allies, and by means of deliberate examples, they taught the old sorcerers marvels. Their allies performed the actions, and the old sorcerers were guided step by step to copy those actions, without changing anything about their basic nature. Do these relationships with the inorganic beings exist today? I can't answer that truthfully. All I can say is that I can't conceive of having a relationship like that myself. Involvements of this nature curtail our search for freedom by consuming all our available energy. In order to really follow their allies' example, the old sorcerers had to spend their lives in the realm of the inorganic beings. The amount of energy needed to accomplish such a sustained journey is staggering. Do you mean, Don Juan, that the old sorcerers were able to exist in those realms like we exist here? Not quite like we exist here, but certainly they lived. They retained their awareness, their individuality. The dreaming emissary became the most vital entity for those sorcerers. If a sorcerer wants to live in the realm of the inorganic beings, the emissary is the perfect bridge. It speaks, and its bent is to teach, to guide. Have you ever been in that realm, Don Juan? Countless times, and so have you. But there is no point in talking about it now. You haven't cleared all the debris from your dreaming attention yet. We'll talk about that realm some other day.